Goeienaand, baie welkom by vanaand se uitsending van Fokus. Ek is Lenet Francis Puren. Welsynsorganisasies is baie bekommerd oor die departement van Basiese Onderwys se vermoë om die nasionale voedingskema by skole te hervat. Die skole heropen volgende week na 'n verlengde vakansie weens die COVID-19 inperkings. Talle menseregteorganisasies het hulle verlede jaar tot die hof gewend om die regering te dwing om miljoene kinders tydens die COVID-19 inperking van kos te voorsien deur middel van die skole se voedingsskemas. Na raming bad sowat 10 miljoen kinders by die skemas. Met die heropening van skole verlede jaar het die departement gespook om die voedingsskema weer op die been te kry. 'n Omstrede besluit is later geneem om net graad 7 en graad 12 leerders deur middel van die voedingsskema te voer. Regisseur Adel van die Kerk het by 'n welsynsorganisasie in Tembisa aan Gauteng se Oosrand gaan inloer.
We are situated at in Tembisa.
Sarah Sabia het in 2013 uit haar voltydse beroep as 'n welsynswerker getree nadat sy die nood in Tembisa gesien het. Sy het besluit om die Sepang sorgsentrum oop te maak om veral in die behoeftes van kinders in die omgewing te voorsien.
Here at Skole camp, there's too much unemployment. Most people are not employed. And what I've realized is most of the kids are coming from a single parent household, single moms. And single moms are not working.
Tydens die nasionale COVID-19 inperking verlede jaar moes miljoene kinders wat op kospakkies by die skool staat gemaak het, soms as die enigste maaltyd vir die dag, skielik sonder die maaltyd klaarkom.
When schools closed in March, quite soon thereafter, we started receiving reports from school communities, so learners, parents and caregivers, and also teachers and school governing bodies, that learners were going hungry because the National School Nutrition Program had been suspended so abruptly. So we started receiving more and more of these complaints that learners were going hungry, and also that entire families were struggling in the context of the lockdown because access to a daily meal at school, parents and caregivers had to provide more food at home, and there were more mouths to feed.
It was a huge number. We couldn't even feed them in the yard. We were using the soccer ground to feed them because it was a huge number. Others coming from far away, not even from our squatter camp. From other squatter camps, they will come and say, we don't have anything, we're no more going to school, we are hungry. So we have to add our pots, we have to add food, and the struggle was now the food was not enough.
The applicants challenged the failure on the part of the Department of Basic Education, as well as the MECs for Basic Education, to roll out the National School Nutrition Program, also the NSNP, when schools closed on the 18th of March 2020. So the NSNP feeds over 9 million children, and when it was stopped on 18 March 2020, it jeopardized the food security of all those learners, as well as exacerbated the hardship that was experienced by their households.
We went to court in June of 2020, essentially saying that the kind of abrupt suspension of the National School Nutrition Program was unconstitutional and unreasonable, and essentially violated learners' rights to basic nutrition, basic education, equality, and dignity. And particularly in the case of children, these rights are immediately realizable and unqualified, which means that government has very special duties with respect to children and learners, to make sure that there aren't delays in the fulfillment of learners' rights.
The judgment was handed down on 17 July 2020, and the court declared that the Department of Basic Education, as well as the provinces, the provincial education departments, are in breach of their constitutional duties for the failure to roll out the NSNP. And that's both to learners who were now back at school, as well as the learners who still remained at home.
Die Sepang sorgsentrum moes kos voorsien aan sowat 500 kinders elke dag. Sarah het in kontak gekom met 'n organisasie, NASH, wat kos herwin wat andersins op die ashoop sou beland. Die herwinde kos wat voorberei word deur die Sepang Sorgsentrum voorsien aan baie van die kinders in die omgewing hulle enigste maaltyd vir die dag. Sarah sê tot 500 kinders word deur die sentrum gevoer.
If they go to school, it will be better because when they go to school, they come after school here. They got a meal for the day. Okay. No, yeah, at least it's whereby we say, okay, the meal, this meal, because they get it 2 to 3 o'clock. Yes. It will push them, even if they don't have anything at home, but at least they've got a meal for the day. But if there's no school, you can see they just come here early and then they have to get everything here.
Essentially what we saw is that there was a lot of contradictory data provided by the provincial education departments. Evidence that we were receiving from the ground was that the uptake of the National School Nutrition Program and the delivery of the school feeding schemes were very patchy and kind of inconsistent. And so we had this kind of back and forth between the Department of Basic Education and ourselves, saying that we needed clarity on kind of making sure that all 9 million learners who rely on the feeding scheme were actually getting the meals that they were legally entitled to.
The Department of Basic Education, as well as the provincial education departments, they filed their plans. They also filed their reports in compliance with the court order. And I think this reporting mechanism was quite an important tool because it allowed for engagement, continuous engagement with both the Department of Basic Education as well as the provincial education departments. And this engagement, we were able to highlight various concerns around the implementation or the rollout of the NSNP.
Sarah hoop dat die departement weer volgende week met die skema sal begin wanneer skole landwyd hul deure oopmaak na die jongste inperking.
What I've seen here, most of the kids, they will go to the rubbish bin to eat there. And you want to reprimand them and they tell you, we don't have food, we don't have anything to eat. So my prayer is if you can have more food so that each household can have something.
Some provinces seem to have started rolling out the feeding scheme to learners, even though schools haven't reopened yet. We know that some schools in the Western Cape and Limpopo have started feeding learners again. However, on the whole, there doesn't seem to be a consistent national plan or strategy for making sure that all learners are reached through the National School Nutrition Program this year.
The expectation ideally is that all qualifying learners, whether they return to school next week or whether they remain at home, will receive the NSNP meals. If these issues is not addressed by provinces sufficiently, I do anticipate that there may be issues again this year when it comes to the rollout and the implementation of the NSNP.
We are anxious about it and we have been in communication with the relevant parties to ensure that plans are set in place for learners to receive their meals, whether it's in the form of a food parcel or whether it's in the form of a hot meal at school.
Regering beter doen hierdie jaar. Net hierna praat ons met die departement van Basiese Onderwys oor hulle planne vir hulle skoolvoedingsskema. Moenie weggaan nie, ons is nou terug. Welkom terug. Volgens 'n onlangse studie deur die Departement van Ekonomie aan die Universiteit van Stellenbosch is 'n hongersnood onder Suid-Afrikaanse kinders aan die toeneem. Soos ons pas berig het, is welsynsorganisasies bekommerd oor die Departement van Basiese Onderwys se vermoë om met die heropening van die skole aanstaande week die skoolvoedingsskema aan die gang te kry. Ons praat nou via Zoom met die woordvoerder van die departement, Elijah Mshlanga. And thank you so much for joining us this evening, Elijah. Last year, you struggled to resume the program. Are the concerns unfounded about the department's ability to deliver?
Good evening. It must be remembered that the department has never had the infrastructure nor the experience of rolling out the school-based nutrition program when schools are not open. It has never happened before. Whenever schools are on holiday, the learners are eating in their own homes or elsewhere where there's a feeding service available. It was the first time in the history of the department that the school nutrition program was supposed to happen when schools are not operational. But what is also important to remember is the fact that during the hard lockdown, movement was not allowed. No one was allowed to leave their home unless you were going to a shop or you were going to see a doctor or for medical attention. So there were strict restrictions regarding the movement of people at that time. So we were not able to say schools are open when the president had clearly stated that gatherings are not allowed. We do not want to go against that particular direction.
So before we come to the outcomes of the court case that compelled you to address the situation, what did you then do in terms of the infrastructure and in the fact that you had learned, okay, there are children that are at home, how do we access them?
Yeah, it's a good question because we did a lot of things which it seems people are now forgetting. The first thing that we were forced to do, and we believe, by the way, the court took the right decision because in acknowledging that there are children who need food, is the court acknowledging the fact that there are children who need assistance. But the question is, how do you help them? Because remember, it was not a normal situation. Every one of us, we were scared of the coronavirus and we didn't want to do things that will end up in people being infected with the virus. So we went out to communicate with our schools to say that those children that benefit from the school nutrition program should be assisted, but schools need to do so safely because we don't want the children who are supposed to benefit from the program ending up with the virus. So we said that children should go to the nearest school. It does not matter whether it's a school where they're enrolled or not. They need to go to a school nearest to them and access the meals. Schools would either prepare food parcels or cooked meals, which the children would be able to access. Even with that, they needed to make sure that they adhere to the safety protocols that involve social distancing, the wearing of masks, and making sure that people are washing their hands and sanitizing. So those are the things that we needed to do. But we also went further to arrange free transport to transport the kids to the schools to collect the meals. But on both cases, the attendance was very low because it was also for the first time that they, as children and their parents, had to go to school only to collect a meal. The meals were always connected to learning. So the feeding was always taking place during the breaks, but in the course of a normal school when learning was taking place. So this was a new environment for everyone. That's why it didn't go as well as expected.
I can appreciate that. You said and acknowledged that the court made the right decision, compelling the department to still provide food to those children. So the allegations that although there was this court outcome, the department still failed to fully adhere to that court ruling, Elijah, particularly in certain provinces where children had no access to food whatsoever.
But let's remember also that during school holidays, the department has never had to feed. And the forced closure of schools was regarded also as a school holiday, when there's no schooling. So normally, previously, in the past 30 years, for example, or in the past 20 years of the school nutrition program, during school holidays, where would those children go? So it must not be made to sound as though the department does not care, such that when the court said we need to feed, we couldn't feed. That's the first point. The second point is that we said schools should open but adhere to strict safety regulations. And we even provided transport, but we couldn't force the children to come to school to collect their meals. All that we needed to do to go out to the media and announce and go to the community and announce that the school nutrition program is now available. And then the onus would be on them to take advantage of the available opportunity. In most cases, we saw parents coming through to collect the meals and going home. In many provinces, in fact, in all provinces, we saw queues of learners with their guardians and parents coming to collect the food parcels. You will never have a 100% picture anywhere on any aspect whatsoever. So that expectation of perfection is unrealistic.
Elijah, I have a few more questions, and I have a feeling it's going to take you some time to work through those. So for now, we're just going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue our discussion. Bly ingeskakel. Net hierna sit ons die gesprek voort. Ons is nou terug. Ons gaan voort met Fokus. Ons praat vanaand oor die skoolvoedingskema van die departement van Basiese Onderwys. Is die departement gereed om die skema te hervat volgende week wanneer kinders terugkeer skool toe? Ons gas is die departement van Basiese Onderwys se woordvoerder Elijah Mhlanga. And let's just continue because I want to touch on the court's ruling. One of the aspects that they required was that the department must submit progress reports in rolling out to the schools feeding schemes. Lobby groups are now alleging that the department failed to submit, and I quote, clear, concise and timely reports. What's your response to this?
Maybe we need to go back to the court judgment. What did it say? Did it say we should submit the reports? Should they be clear? I mean, who determines what is clear and what is not? You see, the problem with NGOs is that when you deliver on something that they did not expect you to deliver, then they find fault in the smallest thing, even if you have done what they said you must do. They have a mandate. I mean, they are doing what they are doing, but the department also has a mandate. The school nutrition program is a priority program of government in general, because we understand that the children in this country need assistance. And we've been running this program successfully for many years, growing it from a very small number of learners to the current 9.6 million children who get feeding without fail every day. And we are happy, by the way, that schools are going back now. When schools are fully operational, the school nutrition program will be fully operational because it was designed as a school-based feeding program. And it is only when the children are in school that it is able to run effectively. That's why even during the hard lockdown, we insisted that schools must open. And people said, no, children must not go back to school because they are going to die there. We knew that if we open schools, we're going to be able to make sure that all those learners benefit from the meals. Even now, we were ready to open schools on the 25th and 27th of January, but we were requested by the Department to delay that. It's not our own doing. We were always ready to open schools last year when people didn't want schools open. We were ready to open schools this year as scheduled, but the circumstances don't allow. Only when schools are open that we are able to feed, because the food stuff, the food items are in the school. The cooking happens there. In fact, even now, all of them have opened the school nutrition program. Food parcels are being collected, and we have pictures indicating that indeed the children are going to collect their meals. So sometimes the NGOs need to listen to what they say, but not take everything that they say, because some of the things that they are demanding are completely unrealistic.
Elijah, it seems to me that you're quite chuffed. You are quite impressed with your performance last year. What have you learned? What has the department learned? Because earlier in our first segment, you pointed out this was unknown territory. We never had the infrastructure, but I don't think we did so badly. So what have you learned, and how are we going to prevent a resurgence of the problems that we had and faced last year?
No, that we must keep schools open no matter what, and we must work together. Partnerships are required. Not slinging. We don't want people throwing accusations. Maybe they must also say what it is that they are doing to make sure that they raise awareness around the issues of safety, because the whole matter is really there. The crisis that we are facing in this country and the world over is not an education problem. It's a public health issue that is affecting all aspects of life. What is the role that those organizations are playing in making sure that the children are wearing masks, the children are keeping social distancing, and that they are washing hands, and that they are learning in a safe environment? Not just throwing accusations, because that doesn't help. What we have learned from last year was that partnerships are going to assist us to go forward if we work together constructively, taking into account the interest of the children.
And in terms of communication, how are you going to streamline the communication between the department and schools and the organising and managing of these feeding schemes with the help and support of NGOs?
In fact, the SABC played a massive role in the last year to assist us. We used channel 1, 2, 3, and we used the digital platforms. We used radio stations, I think 13 radio stations of SABC who were working with us to help the department, to help the government to communicate all issues affecting children and teachers for education purposes. And we appreciate that. We really need to continue with those types of partnerships. But at the end of the day, once the message has been received by people, it's up to them to take the next step after we've communicated. We communicated last year. We said the school feeding is available to those that can get to school. We said, yes, free transport, come collect your meals, but people chose not to come. But remember also that some children had moved from the provinces where they attend schools to other provinces where we were forced to stay in own provinces. Some people were not in the areas of familiarity. So the people had been forced to be in places they didn't want to be at. That could also have had an impact because people were not allowed, as long as there are restrictions in terms of COVID-19 safety, we are not going to be able to succeed in everything that we are doing. So our insistence is that schools must remain open, everyone work together, making sure that the children benefit.
Thank you so much for your time this evening. Dit was Elijah Mshlanga, woordvoerder van die departement van Basiese Onderwys. So ons hoop alles wat hy sê gaan in werking tree volgende week wanneer kinders aanmeld vir skool. Dis al vir vanaand. Onthou Fokus word elke donderdagoggend om 10:30 op SABC 2 herhaal en ons is ook steeds beskikbaar op YouTube. Indien jy met ons kontak wil maak, besoek ons Facebookblad of stuur vir ons e-pos. Ons lees graag jou kommentaar, jou tweets en jou voorstelle. Stuur dit aan fokus@sabc.co.za. Jy kan op hoogte bly van al ons stories op ons Fokusblad op Facebook by Fokus SABC en dan volg jy ons ook op Twitter by Fokus ZA, die besonderhede op jou skerm. Baie dankie vir die saamkyk. Goeie week vorentoe. Totsiens. Tot volgende week dan.